I'm Barb Seals. I've lived in the township since 68, 67, and I lived at the northern end first and eventually moved to the southern end on the North-Maine border. And I've used the library as it changed form over the years with kids and without kids. Right now I'm using it for preview, where you can sign up for the book before it's published and get first in line for the book, which saves you a lot of money on hard copy books. And today I'm picking up a preview of a Michael Connelly mystery and the last, I think, or next to the last, Sue Grafton mystery, the Y mystery. And so I'm real excited about that. And so I've had great use of the library for my kids and I. Okay, I want to tell you about a sweet tradition that started at the Peters Township Library when my daughter was about 6 years old. And she loved to cook, and they had a cooking contest for children because Peters was always good about having things other than books for kids. And so we decided to enter something we called ginger gems, and we made gingerbread from a box, put it in half-filled little miniature bundt cake pans, and made the little bundt cakes. And then we made a lemon glaze out of milk and lemon juice and powdered sugar, and we dribbled it over there and put a little dab of whipped cream on the plate. And she entered her ginger gems, and she won and was very excited and continued to cook. But years later, now, every year when I go to the Soup and Stroll at the Wright House, the historical house, I have to bring an old-fashioned dessert. So I bring ginger gems every year. That started at the library. When my kids were young, my older daughter was about 9, they had a cake decorating class for kids. And her best friend's mother taught the class, Rachel Finger's mother, and they had a wonderful time, so much so that I bought a $60 kit of tips and bags so they could continue decorating cakes. Well, eventually I went looking for the cake decorating kit to make a cake for my grandchild, and I found my daughter had stolen it, and she had it at her house. And I said, "Hey," and she said, "Oh, I need it." And turns out she's making birthday cakes for her kids. Every year it's a tradition in their house that they get to ask for a special sheet cake, and she's made things like the Full Thomas engine and My Little Pony with a rainbow in the background, and other cakes that they've requested because that's their enthusiasm of the moment. So that's another sweet tradition that started at the Peters Township Library.
Hi, I'm Ed Liebarger. Welcome to the Peters Township Public Library's local history room. Over the last 10 years or so, we've assembled a very broad collection of material from township residents relating to the history of the community, including oral histories and many photographs, some of which are available on the library's website. We have many other artifacts here as well. With me today is Bob Moore, and he will be doing a program later in the afternoon. I'll let him say a few words.
So, again, Bob Moore, I'm a 1968 Peters Township High School graduate, the last class from the old school. And starting about 4 years ago, I was an early joiner to a Facebook page that Sally Patz runs called Peters Township, A Trip Down Memory Lane. And I do a lot of Peters Township history posting to that group. A year ago, I live in Wisconsin. A year ago, I came back for a multi-class high school reunion, and one of the Krebs daughters offered me her father's collection of old local weekly newspapers from the 50s through 1970. And so I made thousands of scans of those ever since, and posting some of that information to the Facebook group as well, and sharing other information with friends. And I'm really excited to be able to have a chance to give a presentation about Peters Township history, because in part I'll be showing things from those old newspapers, which aren't yet digitized, but will be. And but also there's so many other resources that a lot of people don't seem to know about, and the point of my talk is to say, wow, look at, look at the sorts of things you can find here, and then have the websites available in a handout so that whoever's interested in any aspect can go on their own time and just spend as much time as they want.
It's a real pleasure to be here. The library has been at our house for all 60 years. My mother was one of the founders of the library and served as the treasurer of the library board for many, many years. So it's really exciting to see a 60-year anniversary. Also reminds me of the fact that I'm getting a lot older. Thank you.
And I was an early user. I remember going to the basement of the school administration building when we first moved to the township, and then when it moved into the top floor of the brand new 1965 municipal building. That was a huge step up.
We actually found pictures of the duplicate and Marathon Bridge, a presentation like this. I may have that. I can share you.
Oh, we're at 75% battery already.
Yes.
Anyway, I gave, this is from one bridge group, and I gave her $320 a couple weeks ago from the other bridge. So we give the library about $600 each year.
And Bridge is one of those games, card games that has lasted, just like the library. I mean, it's one of those that kind of, players ebb and flow with it, but you're always looking for new members, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And they play at the community room here, right across the parking lot, which used to be part of the library. Thank you, Joan. Very well.
And I'm sorry I had to.
It's okay. I'm so happy you're here. John's going to get you to the car. Yes. And
while we have Mr. Easton up here,
I'll have to call my brother and change it to this because this is one question.
John is here.
and Mr. Easton, while you're here, Mr. Easton has a presentation to make.
Did you get it? Okay. Good to see you. Hi.
Wow. Good.
Hello there. How are you?
Cinco Eleni, we have a presentation for you that was a prophecy of the role that you will play in this library. Would you please open this?
Oh my goodness.
Your staff has prepared this.
Oh my goodness.
Welcome frame.
Oh my goodness.
And there, at 10 years old, is Montour Railroad visiting the library. A prophecy for me.
This is too much.
So you now know that Mara is only in her 30s.
It's funny, I said in that video that I was born in 57 and so was the library, so I feel like we grew up together. But oh my gosh, this is a treasure. When we were digging through files and files of newspaper clippings, a few of the staff members, and it was Margaret actually, and I'm not even sure where she is. But Margaret found this clipping. And she gave it to me, and I was just astounded. I remember where I was standing and who I was standing with, and it was across the street. Actually, I have a picture of, I actually saved that picture, and I put it in my presentation. So this is even, oh, this is so beautiful.
That is wonderful.
Oh my gosh, it has everybody's names.
Yes,
Oh.
right here.
I see that. Wait till I show my parents. They were here earlier, but they had to go, so this is good.
That's,
So thank you so much.
see, she went to the library then, and she's still coming back.
This was fifth grade, I remember it.
Mrs. Lee, I believe.
Mrs. Lee.
Mrs. Lee was the librarian at that time. She's like the wind. She's
Yeah,
here, she's in, and she's out.
Thank you, Richard.
Well, thank you, staff.
I will thank the staff. That is so beautiful. Right over here. Oh my God. All right, I'm gonna just do a real quick presentation of the history of the library, just very quickly, because I know we're kind of getting behind on time. But what we have here is a picture of our women's group, because really to give thanks to our very humble beginnings, we have the women of the township, the Peters Township Women's Club to thank. So you're going to see some more pictures of them. And it was the Women's Club back in 1956 who got the idea that they wanted to form a library. They went to the Chamber of Commerce and started getting donations of books and furniture. Here are some of the names. You might recognize some of these people. They're former directors. Century Club was a big organization here in the township. Over on the right were the Women's Club members. Out in the hallway we have Mrs. Leibarger and Mrs. Miner's picture. Here, 56, they're still gathering things. They're keeping them in one of their homes. Here we have two librarians that are gathering, starting to catalog the materials, and they really are piling up for the library. We love these pictures, they're so now we officially get the new library, which actually began in the high school. Across the street is part of the high school library. It moved from there, it went from there to the, it went from the high school, it went from the back of the high school library to across, oh, this is moving. I didn't want it to across the street, there was a house, and it was the administration building of the township, and down below was where the library went next, and those folks right there are standing in front of that administration building. It's actually where I had my interview as a teacher. So Dr. Jack was there, and so I happened to be there. And to the right is Tom McMurray. He's on our school board now. And that's Tom as a child who was back in, that's 1963. So evidence that he was there at that library way back when.
I love the word.
Yeah.
From the many books available.
Yes.
Now there should be the thousands of books.
Exactly.
many books.
Alrighty. So then from that home, and actually just so you know, the library is built on that property when that home was demolished. So there was a home here, the Snodgrass home, and it was demolished, and that's where we moved next. Then we went across the street to what is now the municipal building. That was the third location, and that's where that picture that they just presented to me as a child, that's where I was. It was upstairs on the second floor of the library. So there's that picture. That is just, oh my gosh, I'm so touched. But that's us. We were all there loving books and loving the library. I'm the one on the left. And then, so at that facility, there was a new head librarian that was named, and her name was Mrs. Thad Jackson. And she was the first official head librarian or director. Then we moved from there across the street to the police, which is now the police station. That is the library, and that's where Mrs. Lee came on board in 1974. I was actually a senior in high school, and I got to meet Mrs. Lee there as I was going for my master's. We met each other several times. But here's a picture because, once again, we outgrew the library again. And here are some people you may recognize. That's Tony Slukowski on the bottom left. That's her mom on the bottom right. And several of the other board members and citizens that said, we need a bigger library. So it was expanded once again. And then Mrs. Lee comes. She came, she actually officially began in '74. There she is, seeking lots of new changes. And, you know, to this day, we have so much to be thankful for, thanks to Mrs. Lee. So then when this library was started to move, this is the book brigade that is bringing the books to the new library. Well, here we go, we're going faster.
What I caught, we're up to 24,000 books.
24,000. More fundraising. Mrs. Lee was a master of the fundraising. This was for the for the expansion, and known for many things. One of the first things was the first automated library catalog in the area. So we've been known for a lot of firsts. Here's the duplicate bridge. That's Joan over there on the far right. She just left, but that's her. And once again, they are giving us wonderful support. Here now are the thoughts to build the new library here across the parking lot. Plans began several years before we broke ground, which was 1999. The library opened with something for everyone. There's some of our members of the Taste of the Township Committee, Mrs. Lee in the bottom right-hand corner. It wasn't always good times. I wanted to point out one episode where there was a big sprinkler that gushed through on the second floor, and picture water pouring over that rotunda into the main lobby. Here are just some other wonderful accolades through the years. We're wanting to make another expansion. So, whoops, go back to that. So they've added the teen room, the family activity center, which are to the far right. So those are, you know, we just haven't been able to contain ourselves, which is always a good thing. This is another look back. That's the high school on the far top left. That's the addition, and through those doors, kind of through that picture is where the library was located. There we have our second location with the house. The third location is the township building. And then we have the township police station, which would have been our fourth. And then this is our fifth location here at the library where we now sit. I just wanted to bring you up to date, just to show how that rotunda and this library remains so active. Just this past week, we had the former defense minister from Germany and the Swedish ambassador. She's the one on the right. Pittsburgh World Affairs Council hosted them. We're partners with them. And it was a wonderful evening. The whole rotunda was filled with students upstairs and students downstairs as well as adults. We also have that fish pond, which remains since this was initiated, since the building was built. We had a Eagle Scout who built the fish pond, and it remains to be such a popular site. So through the years, some things don't change. Something that did change was our patio. We just had that done this week for our umbrella tables. We like to think of it as the library's front porch. So join us for reading outside, a bite to eat, just to enjoy the fresh air. Those are two, Mrs. Miner and Mrs. Leibarger are two of the women who were consistently so instrumental in bringing the library from the Women's Club to what we see today. And they're pictured outside here in the hallway. This month in your community magazine, you will see some snapshots of some various events here at the library. And the author of Inheritance, who wrote the book about early onset Alzheimer's. We have children's concerts. That is a gentleman from the Army War College. Something that's consistent in all of those pictures is the logo for the PA Forward program, which are a set of benchmarks that libraries across the state are working towards achieving to move all Pennsylvania citizens forward. There's a bronze, a silver, and a gold, and we received our gold star this year. Those are the basic literacies. So in our programming, we try to hit the basic literacy would be children's materials, even literacy for adults. Adults that are learning English as a second language. Information literacy are the objectives that we follow through with computers. Civic and social, events like the Army War College or a World War II group. Health literacy, we have a lot of events that revolve around Medicare, Medicaid. We also take blood pressure here the last Wednesday of the month. So we try to match those objectives. And then financial literacy, we're always trying to provide opportunities to learn how to be smart about your finances. We had a big event this past April with wonderful exhibits that was a national project that Sue Miller, our assistant director, she won that award. So we try to hit all of those, and we're proud of what we've achieved, and we certainly want to maintain that, so we'll keep hitting all 5 of those literacies. Also, just a picture of our staff. Our big summer reading theme was Build a Better World, and we were working hard at staff development and working together as a team. Here's just another one of our rooms. Sometimes the room is arranged this way, short ways. That's Todd DeCastina from the Veterans Breakfast Club, part of our big World War I grant that we received this year. Once again, taking a look outside, kids are important. They're here in the summer, they're here after school. Sometimes even doing summer music camps that they teach one another. Those are middle school students teaching the elementary ones. And our light board, which is a new gift from the foundation and through donations through the WCCF Gives program. So we are appreciative of the community support that we feel from all of you. And we look to the future. This is the day where we were all looking up at the solar eclipse. Those are the new teachers in the district. We're trying to work closely with the school district. So we do a little in-service with the new teachers. So they all have their solar eclipse classes. And just like they're looking forward and looking up, that's what we hope to do as a library as well. And we are today, 60 years later. So thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to move to the next part of our presentation. I'd like to introduce to you Bob Moore, who is the valedictorian of the class of 1968. I was not the valedictorian, I was class of 75. But Bob is just, I'll tell you what, he has taught me so much about the township, its history, and really connecting to all of what was once here. So he is going to show you a sampling of his research, how he finds what he finds, and where you can go to find more about this township and our rich history. So, Bob, I'm going to give you the clicker. I don't know if you want to stand at the front.
I'd like to stand
Okay,
at the
and I
front.
know you have some handouts.
So is this going to advance automatically?
should.
Okay, so that would be very good.
Yeah, I know. That was
And this will be enlarged to the size of the screen.
Gregory, can you enlarge this sentence?
Well, then
Let's pull it back. Yeah, that was, and I apologize for that. I don't know why they were advancing like that. I did not say that.
Okay, so I was so happy to get the invitation to speak at this event. When I was in high school, history was my favorite subject, but I figured the chances of earning a living major in history were really small, and so I went into science. Given many scientific talks, but I'm so happy I can finally give a history presentation on something that just fascinates me. So I have given one public talk previously in the township. There was Bob Grimble, and who I'm still in contact with, and just a little bit older, a little bit heavier. And this will be far more entertaining than the talk I gave. So, in thinking back, I got interested in local history. I can think of three things. I loved Mr. Douglas. I had him for Algebra 1 in 8th grade, maybe 63, 64. We got to spend the whole time solving puzzles. It was so much fun. And he talked about local history, because the Douglas family's been in the township for a very long time. And one of the things I remember him telling us is about there used to be a blacksmith shop where the dairy bar is. And it just intrigued me. What did it look like? When was it there? When did it disappear? And so that's, a few years ago I finally found out what it looked like. I want to show two more pictures that are very meaningful to me from the township. I worked at Opeka Auto Body Shop for the 3 summers after high school graduation. That's me in the middle. I learned an awful lot from John. He was just an amazing person. And here's the second thing that intrigued me from as far back as I can remember. We moved in 1959. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was an early user of the library. I can remember going many times when it was in the basement of the school administration building, and then less often, but once it moved to the top of the new municipal building that opened in 1965, I remember using it as well. Okay, so I came here in '59, 4th grade, and very quickly realized that the streetcar used to run through the township, and went back and forth on Valley Brook Road many times, and you could see the abutment up here on the south side from Valley Brook Road. And I wondered for almost 50 years what that bridge looked like. Was it wooden? Was it metal? What was the structure? Was it 1 or 2 tracks? And I finally started finding pictures of it about 10 years ago. So that's another early interest in local history. All right, now, what I'm basically going to do in my talk is to give you lots of samples of things that I think are interesting about Peters Township history, and give you, and there's a handout that should be available, so you don't have to write down the website addresses. So I'm going to start with the Montour Railroad website. People who worked on that railroad, which has been defunct for quite a while now, if there was a bridge, if there was a tunnel, if there was a siding or an industry, they documented it. And so it's actually a rich source of Peters Township history. So they cover the whole extent of the railroad. I took the 1961 Chamber of Commerce map and then highlighted in blue where the railroad went, if you don't know. So of course a lot of it is bike trail now. And so the next several pictures come from that website. So this is the Montour Mine number 4 was along here. That's Valley Brook Road. It was crossing over the creek, Brush Run and Valley Brook Road, and about 8 or so hundred feet from here going forward, it'd be crossing under Route 19. These people were thorough, because that was taken in 1952. They also have a photo of the temporary bridge when the railroad was being constructed in 1913, 1914. And the Montour Mine number 4 is just starting to be developed. Another one taken just the other side of Route 19. That again is the Streetcar Bridge, And from Ed Library today, I got the exact dimensions, 799 feet by 80 feet. Very impressive. Go up to find the abutment on the south side, stand on top, and look across the valley. It's just amazing. This to me is sort of a prototypical picture of the heart of McMurray, except that that's not a coal hopper. But the old underpass that was only 24 feet wide, the dairy bar is just out of sight, and then the old narrow bridge that I was so used to and hit once in John O'Keefe's truck. And then the last photo from the Montour website is the Montour mine. This is when it was open. It still wasn't fully built. This building, of course, is still here.
Yeah.
And in later years, that tipple was replaced by a smaller one. I don't have time to talk about it, but there are two other websites where if you're interested in coal mining, which is such an important part of the local industry and community, then these have a vast amount of information about coal sites, including coal mines, including ones that were in Peters Township. Next section is Peters Township Maps. I've always been fascinated by maps. This is the earliest one I can find. It was actually prepared in 1924, but it shows the original landowners. And they go back to 1769. There might be an earlier date that I missed. But there's a lot of familiar names here, and they had different names for their farms, and so we're actually in what used to be called Mesopotamia, I believe. If not, we're in the next one. And so that emphasis was on the landowners, not too much in the way of roads. I just found this one a few weeks ago. It was a statewide survey, and now we're starting to see things like, so Brush Run Creek is there. I don't really believe that that road was there because the road would have been right beside the creek, but you've got an early version of the road, Old Washington Road, and Peters Township went all the way to here then because Union Township hadn't been split off. I think that was 1836 or something like that. Okay, the next one is from 1856, and now you can see some normal elements. So Old Washington Road is a very consistent thing, and now part of this is Old Oak Road. You've got Donaldson's Crossroads wasn't quite a crossroads yet. It was, they were offset a little bit. Thomas Road is there. Valley Brook is there. Oh, and Thompsonville was in its final position by then. And early on, that would be Center Church Road. Another one from a few years later, 1861. With a little bit more detail and probably maybe a little bit more accurate. This one is from the Bicentennial Book of Washington County History, which not only has maps, but a lot of drawings of farms and houses in it. And then this was a real important one for me because notice that McMurray, so there's the heart of McMurray, but notice that McMurray Road doesn't go up over the hill and then up by where the golf course has been. It goes in that valley, and that answer to mystery, the third and final mystery I want to tell you about that I wondered about for decades and intrigued me for so long. And then there's a lot of familiar sites here by then. The Crossroads is a crossroads, but that horrible intersection that's been reconfigured a number of times between East McMurray Road and Center Church Road. It was actually a safe configuration back then. And then there's a whole series of Washington County maps, and it shows pretty much the same thing. So this is the part that I'm going to show you some photos of next. So I grew up right about there on Lyndonville Drive, and one of the first things I found exploring the woods is that there was a narrow, grassy, tree-lined road, level, that somebody kept mowing. Never saw the mowing, but what was it there for? I never saw any vehicles on it, just us kids walking on it. it turns out that it was the original McMurray Road in that area. And 2 years ago, when I was in the library visiting, I found out so from these old maps, I found out, okay, that's what it was. And then in the library, in an exhibit, I found out when they abandoned that part of the road. It was when the Montour Railroad came through in 1913, 1914, and there would have been, I'll get this eventually, I hope. There would have been a dangerous grade crossing at Valley Brook Road. So they decided, well, they're going to build the underpass for Thomas Road, and then we just build a new road up over the hill. So of course, when you're driving it in the winter time, you wish the old one was still there. And then 2 years ago, I walked most of that length. So I went down Lyndonville, and there's a relatively new road that goes down the hill, and just parked in the turnaround area, and this was looking straight towards the current East McMurray Road, and that's exactly what it was so beautiful. And now it's fenced off, but I find it so striking. And then here's the second picture that I took walking towards the Dairy Bar area. You see how old I am. And then the final picture, and it's just this little hidden treasure that I now know what it is. And then Washington County map. So this was, okay, so Route 19 was brand new. The streetcar's already in. Well, that was there from 1909. And then the last one I'm showing is the USGS maps. I use the 1953 ones a lot in history research. And some roads have disappeared. Obviously lots of new ones, but some of them are gone too from the maps. And I think that's pretty interesting. And the last thing in terms of maps I'm showing is that the Washington County Parcel Observer is not a great source for map, but you can learn about the individual properties, and there's some interesting information about their history and structures. The next thing I want to talk about is that I found 2 years ago in the library, I found several old books, like this one, History of Washington County. And they were published anywhere from, well, I'll show you the dates. The last one is 1926. And they have a lot of information about every aspect of Washington County, including sections on Peters Township. And so if you're not aware of those, there's a lot there. And so here I'm listing them, the first four. Yeah, okay. So you can download in multiple formats the entire scanned versions with search for, you can search for words and terms and quickly get to anything that, if you're looking for something specific. So 1870, 1882, 93, and then 1910. And then the last one that I know of is from 1926, and here you can't search and see the whole thing, but you can do it by page. And there are some photos of township people in some of these books, and a few maps. Aerial photos are a treasure. I've used them a lot in posting that I do on the Peters Township A Trip Down Memory Lane website. Pen Pilot is the easiest one to navigate, but that's been down lately, although they're working on it. And so you can get to it through the other one. And so I'm going to show a few examples. Did anybody recognize, so this is in Peters Township, does anybody recognize what part of the township that is?
Yeah. Is that the intersection of Bebop and Valley-Brook?
Nope.
No?
Nope. That's Donaldson's Crossroads. Right before, it was a year or two or three later, I think about 2 years later, that Route 19 came through. That's the old streetcar line. That's West McMurray Road. You go down the hill and you make that fairly sharp turn and you go through those concrete abutments for a bridge for the old Chartiers Southern Railroad that was built but never had trains run on it, which is another thing that intrigued me for a long time. Okay, so that's one example, and then if you go to Google Earth or Google Satellite view, you get this incredible resolution. And so I'm blowing up parts of this map, and at this point, you can get it larger, but it's still blurred. So you just don't get the level of detail. But they're an amazing resource for looking at what the township looked like. So this should look familiar, because that's the heart of McMurray there. And so the high school was tenured. This was 1939. The high school was 10 years old. By then, the building that later became the home ec building was already there. Thomas Road with that interesting little branch on it. Some businesses along Valley Brook Road. Lots of farms. And this is the road that I eventually grew up on. And then, so that's 1939. By 1958, we're starting to see a lot of changes. McClintock Acres is already there. Those buttons are too close, at least for me, my level of athletic skill. Lyndonville, that's the year before we built our house. Is that Orchard Highlands up there?
Yes.
Okay. And then by then, the 1957 edition of the school was in. McMurray Elementary was built.
Orchard Highlands.
Orchard Highlands is over here.
Okay, so
Yeah, that's up by St. Benedict's.
Right.
Camelot.
yeah.
But Camelot isn't in there.
No, not yet. The Matthews Farm is still there. That's the Matthews Farm.
Where did you say the old McMurray Road was?
Okay, so on this one, so you can still see that going there, and then that line of trees over to here. Thank you for asking, because I was trying to remember to say that when I showed you the there's that crossing again. But it's easier to see in the next one. And then, so that's 58. We moved in the next year. And by 1967, of course, way more houses. And the gap in the school has been filled in with the 1961 addition. There's now, the baseball field, the football field, the tennis courts, and so forth.
That's Orchard Highlands right there.
Okay, thanks. And then this is from some imagery from 2 years ago. So when they constructed, look at how many trees there are now. I mean, there used to be all these farms and not that many trees. And there's actually, at least in this area, more trees than there were before. And then one thing I didn't learn about until a few months ago is that there's a company that went around flying a small airplane, taking pictures and trying to sell the photos to people. And so they're not all labeled, but it's fun to go through the Washington County, say I'm looking in the McMurray area, and then you go through the rolls of film, and this one is Valley Brook Road, McMurray Road, and the McMurray House is right there. And the siding off the Montour Railroad. Because there used to be a state there, well, there wasn't a state, there was a stop there when they had passengers. Okay, the VFW local post has a wall of valor that honors 32 veterans from the 3 most recent major wars. And if you haven't, I've never personally been in the building, but if you haven't ever gone to their website and looked at that, it's pretty interesting. I'm just going to show 2 of them. This is the one for Tom Scheit, who was the year before me. As far as I know, he's the only Peters Township resident who was killed in the Vietnam War. And then there's another one for John Opeka, who I had worked for 3 summers at the auto body shop. And he survived the war. Given the number of flights he went on, that's pretty amazing. So it's just samples of what's there. The school district has a website with some history on it. And so this is just the first page of it, but it has a lot of, I think, interesting photos and text about all sorts of things, such as the catastrophe when the current school was close to being ready to open and the contractor bailed, and what do they do next? And they managed to get it open more or less on time with great adventure. So there's a lot of interesting things there. Sally Pax. about 4 or 5 years ago, set up a Facebook group, Peters Township, a trip down memory lane. I do a lot of posting to that group on local history. And several people whose pictures are here are in the audience. Thank you for coming.
It's a wonderful resource, Bob, but truly, I mean, for the ages, you know, and it just brings back fond memories, and it's so great to hear from classmates, so, yeah, you're interested.
And so I do a lot of history posting on that, on this group. That's what I do most of my Facebook posting on, because I really enjoy finding things and then sharing them with the group. So a year ago, I came to the township for a multi-class reunion, and Kathy Krebs, who's sitting in the audience, said, you know, we have this collection of my dad's old newspapers. Would you like them because you do all the posting? Yes! Yes! Oh, that'd be wonderful. I mean, I shouldn't own them. They should belong at the library, but that was Labor Day and the library was closed, so I had to wait till the next day to offer them to the library, and Myra and Margaret were just thrilled because they knew how important they were. I said, but I want to give them to you, but not until next year. I'm going to work with these papers because they're just such a treasure trove. I've spent a lot of time in the last year working through them. So the rest of my talk is nearly all taken from those old local newspapers. Okay, I guess I got ahead of myself here a little bit. So the website has 171, I think it is, local history photos that have an awful lot of information on them that I find interesting. The physical resources in this library for history are really amazing. There's the 21 oral histories that are just filled with gems and nuggets that, you know, Peters Township used to have air rail service. Didn't have an airport, but there was air rail service. There was a battle over whether the school should be accredited. Fortunately, the people in favor of accreditation won. So there's all sorts, you know, there's a very almost complete yearbook collection. The 1976 bicentennial book is there, oral histories. This is the dedication ceremony from spring of 1930, from when the 1929 high school opened and was dedicated. And in the background here, the background to me is the best treasure of all. It's a part of one page, and there's multiple pages on the diagrams for building the streetcar through Peters Township that connected Cannonsburg to the Pittsburgh system in Castle Shannon. It's in the local history room. Okay, there are a lot of newspapers you can available for free to read through Google. There's a lot of gaps in them, but there's 11 Pittsburgh papers and 6 or something Washington, PA newspapers. The Cannonsburg ones aren't free. You got to pay for those, and you can find all sorts of things you want. So I selected from a great day that I remember distinctly when the Pirates won the 1960 World Series. But you can find, you can search and browse, and it's really fun to look at those. It's a great resource. Okay, now I'm back where I thought I was. So the Krebs Professional Center was essentially the first shopping center in the township. Went up around 1960, I forget exactly when it was. And Reinhard Yuppie Krebs was the developer, and there were these local weekly newspapers. He subscribed to the newspapers, and apparently his wife let him save the issues. Kathy can embellish on that if she wants. And so there's the whole family, and the parents died about the same time, roughly 13 years ago, I think it was. And the 3 girls didn't throw them out because they recognized the historic value of those newspapers, and they came into my hands last year, and they will be in the libraries. I'm nearly done scanning from them. So there was one issue from 1956 of the Recorder, only 4 issues of the Commerce News that was published by the Chamber of Commerce. In 1958, they changed the name to the Peters Township News and went from monthly to weekly. And then the majority of the collection that I have in my possession was the News Progress, very little past 1966, just a few sprinklings, but very heavy coverage from those earlier years, and then just a few from the Homespun News. Okay, so here are some things that I found that I thought were interesting. Anybody recognize the Donaldson's Crossroads Shopping Center? Well, it didn't get built, did it? Not this one. And this was by the DeBartolo Construction Company, you know, as in the Eddie DeBartolo San Francisco Giants, or 49ers owner. Same company, same family. Something else was built later, as we know. At about the second time, this was going to be the other major shopping center. Donaldson's Crossroads was going to cost $4.5 million in 1958 money. This one was going to be $5.5 million because it needed much more grading. It was the Cortem Construction Company on Route 19, the other side of 19, just up the hill from the Round Hotel. So going up the hill from Valley Brook Road, on the right-hand side is the old ore farm as you're heading south. And they had all these plans. There's photos that I have of the bulldozers, and you know, it was going to be a whole bunch of houses and then this giant shopping center. And if anybody knows, well, actually, Ed Leiberger told me today that in part it died because of a street access problem. But the newspapers don't say why. But I thought it was interesting to see what sort of plans there were. Dial telephone calls. You don't have to ask an operator to connect you to somebody. So the first one was in February 1958 in that new building across from the old high school net. The township police force went up, it increased by 50% at the stroke of a pen. It went from 2 to 3 full-time officers. Now there was the Peters Township Protective Association, which was very active in many activities, and there were also a lot of auxiliary police, including Agnes Finley. But that was a milestone to get from 2 to 3. And at one point, in the 60s, they got up to 2 vehicles. I remember this. On Valley Brook Road, there was this building. It was a basement. And it sat there for years. And it turns out, I now know that was the Chamber of Commerce building, where in a burst of enthusiasm that might have been killed by the 1959 recession, they had all these plans for this building, and if anybody knows the fate of that structure, was it torn down or eventually completed? I don't know. I'd be interested in finding out. We got a supermarket, Loblaws, at the Crossroads. I remember that's where Mom shopped.
It was the only store in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was the only supermarket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a milestone to get, so January 1959. Okay. Remember Esperanto?
Yes.
It was going, we were going to have world peace. Because we're all going to speak the same language and there'll be no more misunderstandings between that and the United Nations. Okay. So this is from the National Lampoon High School Yearbook. If you've never seen the National Lampoon High School Yearbook, it is a riot. It's the best piece of satire ever written, in my opinion. It is an absolute gem. And I have my copy with me. And so, you know, in this yearbook, they're showing all the different clubs. And then at the bottom of one page, they show, you know, what they named the advisor and then all the students in the club. And here for the Esperanto Club, left to right, Mrs. Hamster, advisor. Yeah. Okay. Peters Township had Esperanto. There were a bunch bunch of articles about Esperanto. I'll bet you didn't know that.
I'd like to see if anybody speaks it now.
You know, I posted once to the Peters Township Trip Down Memory Lane Facebook page in Esperanto, because you could Google Translate, turn English into Esperanto. I posted in Esperanto. Does anybody remember the Esperanto Club at the township? I vaguely remember it was offered at the school as a club at least 1 year. Does anybody, and nobody responded. I don't understand why. So yes, we had Esperanto. Okay, population, because the next several slides are going to talk about the consequences. So, I mean, you can see, okay, so World War II and ended about in the middle there. 1950 was starting to rise, and then just massive growth. And so they're faced with lots of problems because it was a very rural community. There were no sewers. There were very few roads. Even some of the major roads weren't paved yet. School, all these families moving in, all these kids, we got to have schools big enough to accommodate them, lots of churches, and so forth. So the next few slides are about the sorts of issues that are a consequence of the massive population growth. Zoning was a huge issue. This is a recurring theme in those newspapers, especially in the earlier years, because Peters Township didn't have any zoning until I think it was around 1956. And so there were all sorts of disputes over land use, which apparently aren't entirely solved yet. And one huge one was whether John Opeka could build on the acre he had bought on Valley Brook Road because he wanted to have an auto body shop. And Sam Easton, who had the lumber yard down the road, was supportive, and Don Duckworth was against. And so there's these names from township, and they battled, and there were suits and so forth. Somehow it eventually got settled, but then somebody else wanted to have a sheet metal shop, and they had to go through part of it again. And then Krebs wanted to build a gas station at the Krebs Center, and that apparently never flew because of zoning, and there were a lot of different battles over zoning. Roads was another major issue because there were conflicting ideas. One was that there was a statute or law or case law, whatever it was, that once a road becomes into common use, then it's the responsibility of the township to pave it and maintain it. And on the other side were the township supervisors, where they're trying to keep costs down. Look, if you want to build a housing development, move it into the township and build a housing development, you have to pay for the road. And you have to bring it up to standards. Once you build it and it's at those standards, then yes, we'll maintain it, but until then, no. And so lots of conflicts over that. There's many, many stories about any given street or subdivision or development. And the case in Peters Township that went to the state Supreme Court established the case law that then finally settled the issue from a legal standpoint. I don't remember what the ruling was, but this was a huge issue as well. Sewers, there were no sewers in the township. I think the first one was in 1961, and they were doing these little sewage treatment plants in bits and pieces, and then they figured out, okay, well, let's have them connected and larger plants and fewer plants and so forth. And again, many articles about the sewage issue, but it's a very real issue. You have that exponential growth, and you can't rely on septic tanks anymore. Schools. So as of the start of that real rapid growth, there was Venetia, McMurray Elementary Schools, and then the high school that was built in 1929. And then I've listed if you just think in terms of these rapid changes. So 57, 59, 61, 63. What a pace. And then the current, what old people like me still call the new high school. Was a gap of a few years, although it was originally supposed to open in 64. Well, they missed, but I think it's understandable. So here's a photo of the best photo I can find of the 1957 addition to the high school, which was the biggest part of it. The library was on the other side of that. Elm Grove was built in 59, opened early in 1960. And then I really love this picture because it was taken from the old cafeteria, the new biology lab, looking across when that gap between Murray Elementary and the high school was filled in. That was the summer of 1961. And here we have some sidewalk superintendent classmates of mine, Bruce Peters, Randy Smith, Tom McMurray, on your school board, Stephen Dithridge, no, somebody else, Sandy Kowinski, Paul Motory. And then last night I found a photo of of what that addition looked like, and then we have the day, that huge cafeteria. This was taken the day it opened, and that's a bunch of classmates standing there, or sitting there with smiles on their faces, including Kathy Krebs, who's in the audience. I have to say Tom Stuck's name, because he'll be mad at me if I don't say his name. And that's Jim Carey's, who is in Carey's Restaurant. Then Pleasant Valley opened a couple years later. I still to this day don't understand why you would build a school near the top of the hill and have Valley in the name of the school. I mean, I know the original Pleasant Valley was closer to a valley, but I personally wouldn't have put Valley in the title, but that's the way it is. And then the current high school, okay, so you guys are going through the controversies now over this is going to cost too much. Yeah. Bill, but I mean, in the audience, Bill Merrill here, I mean, he knows all this stuff. And there was a citizen revolt that this is going to cost too much because look at all these other schools. They only cost this, that, and that, and we're being gouged here, and this isn't right. And the school board came back, you're comparing the cost of the building with the cost of the project. If you include the cost of the land, site development, utilities, roads, landscaping, whatever else it is, you're getting a great deal. But these massive citizens meetings to complain about things, and they spent months trying to decide how they were going to heat the building. Was it going to be a single unit or individual units? Was it going to be gas? Was it going to be electric? Some of each, and I think it took them over a year to solve that. So what's going on now in terms of where to build and how to do it is a rehash of the old battles. And then I think this is my last category of general things, churches. I mean, this is just a massive explosion in building new churches or expanding existing churches. And because I was raised Catholic, I'm doing the St. Benedict's thing. So, because that's what I know. So that was the original drawing for what the building was going to look like. So there's kind of a theme here of original drawings don't necessarily pan out. That, of course, is a rather crude model of what was built, and that's opening day, or the January day they broke ground. There were some other recurring issues. Mine subsidence was a huge one. It eventually claimed most of the old, high school area. Well, in the entire old high school, as well as Elm Grove Elementary, as I understand it. So that was just a massive recurring issue and problem in the township. The volunteer fire department, they had a begathon every year because there was, it's like, look, your homeowner's insurance costs you a lot less if you then, because we have a fire department here. If you give us $10 or $5 a year, you're still going to save $25 or $30 a year on your insurance because we can protect your house. And as far as I can tell through the 60s, they didn't really solve the financing problem. There were lots of volunteer community groups that helped them and helped many other community things. School accreditation was a big thing. They made major improvements in the school curriculum and activities. I mean, they were adding sports. Judy?
Yeah. Bob, I'm just curious. You said earlier that there was concern about school accreditation. What would they have been teaching if they hadn't accredited the school system?
Esperanto.
I mean, would it have been a trade school? And would we have ended up going to Cecil or to Canon Mac? I mean, where would we have gone if Peters hadn't been accredited? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, that leads to a different answer. I think it was just in terms of the quality of the education and the full range of courses to be offered.
Okay.
It's for purposes of.
Well, of course, so you have to, we don't want to spend any more
Right.
against but if you think ignorance is, if you think schools are expensive, price ignorance sometimes.
Yeah.
It's for college accreditation. And as this became more suburbanized
That was a part of
here,
it.
and people were looking at colleges, they wanted to see that accreditation in
I
high
see.
schools. So there was a push to get that curriculum
Yeah.
in alignment.
So, but it was a normal.
They
High
had pretty
school.
much the typical Carnegie units and
Right.
whatnot, at the high school level, but accreditation gave them a little more competitiveness and a little more veracity with some of the other high school, school districts in the area.
Okay.
And one of the things I learned from one of the oral histories, I read John Opeka's oral history that's in the building here. And I had no idea, even though I knew him for decades, that he was one of the people saying we need to have the high school accredited because when he applied to college post-World War II, he couldn't get accepted because I think he's from Oakdale. The school he went to wasn't accredited. So he could get into a trade school, he could get night classes, but he couldn't get accepted into high school. And if he didn't want to, or into college, or the college he wanted to go to, I think it was Carnegie Tech, I don't remember.
Penn State. Penn State is
Okay.
where he wanted to go. He went to Carnegie.
Okay, thank you. And he didn't want his kids or anybody else to have to suffer that misfortune. So he was one of the people saying we need to accredit. And once Dr. Reichert came on board, then yes, it moved. And it was another school issue. I remember this at the time, in the early 60s, that all the school districts were supposed to consolidate into these massive school districts with massive busing, and Peters Township was dead set against it, and eventually the opponents prevailed. But that was a big issue for a few years.
Weren't we supposed to be going with Cannon McMillan?
Yep.
Yeah, and then St. Clair and Mount Lebanon were supposed to go, and those three school districts, from what I remember, but we had enough attorneys living in the community, they fought and stayed alone. But remember now, Cannon McMillan, Trinity, Chartiers Valley, Ringgold, all joined together. So
Okay.
it was an interesting time.
And the people in this township argue, we have a good school.
Yeah.
We're better than the surrounding schools, and we don't want to get merged in. That was Act 561, I think. And then I mentioned briefly there was an amazing proliferation of community groups, volunteer activity, including the Women's Club of Peters Township, who were the ones who got this library started and carried it for over a decade. Amazingly impressive volunteer work. There were so many people giving of their time and money to do things and not relying on government. And we want, this is important. How can we get it done? Remember that fallout shelter?
Yeah.
On Route 19, I think it was just north of Valley Brook
At the
Road.
time, my dentist's office, whenever he bought the building, they had to tear it down. That's Dave Benetti's dad.
Yeah, I just found that out.
I was there watching him build it.
So, I mean, I remember that going up. So why is there a fallout shelter there? Above ground, of course. And, well, there's stories in the old newspapers. Peters Woods was the Consolidation Coal Company donated 26 acres of land, and volunteers did all the planning, including my classmate's mom, classmate Glenn Fickender's mom, Peg, was one of the leaders in this effort.
We're still waiting for this one.
And now, are there tennis courts
It's
yet?
coming.
Okay, I don't know the park
Yeah.
very
Tennis
well.
courts are here.
Okay. Well, mañana, but these were the original plans as far as I can tell. Okay, so Donaldson's Crossroads Shopping Center, when that, a real one started to get built, that was of course huge news. These newspapers are full of stories a year or two later about the South Hills Village. But at the time, this was just major news. And despite, to settle an argument over from the Facebook group, yes, there really was an Isley's in Donaldson's Crossroads Shopping Center. It says right up there. grand opening, October of 1963. There was lots of information about schools in these newspapers, venues, you know, porcupine balls. I didn't find one that had 8 pinwheels in it. I'm hoping we'll get some at the 50th class reunion on your dark table. Yeah, a few of those. I generally avoided Friday lunch. So honor roll lists and where to, you know, the bus schedules and homeroom schedules, and I mean, just a treasure trove of information in these newspapers about schools and school-related things. Okay, I decided to stop when when my class finished grade school. I found 70 photos of classmates. Yeah, Ralph Barton was a friend of mine, the son of the police chief. I see Lynn Bly's posts on Facebook. Tom Burdett died 2 or 3 years ago. Wayne Cleary is a minister somewhere in Pennsylvania, I think.
No, he's just retired.
Oh, okay, thank you. Cynthia is in the audience right here.
See?
And has been a wonderful host on my visit here. I'll be getting together with Gwen Fickinger in Milwaukee in about 3 weeks, giving her this presentation. Patty Fiore was not throwing up. She and her brother, Tony, I think his name was, were eating popcorn at one of those, there were lots of fairs, several fairs a year, I forget which one. Farm fair, fireman's, whatever it was. See post from Bob Friday. Harry Frick turned out to be your long-term police chief. The saddest one here is Julia Gilliland, who was killed in that horrible crash on Route 19 by Westminster Church in summer of '63. The VFW started an ambulance service a very short time after that. It's not clear whether that was the impetus for them to do that, but from that point on, when the VFW started that service, things got somewhat better. Bob Grimble's an attorney in New York City. What else do we have? I talked with Gary Jeffers last year. Pat Keeley's still in uniform. Well, okay, he's retired now, but he spent quite a number of years in the Marines, major wounds in Vietnam, and then was a police officer for many years. Al Needler died about 10 years ago. Kathy Krebs is in the audience, as I said, and the one who the newspapers came into my possession through her. Just went back and forth with Dave Lothar a few days ago. Dave said the most profound thing I ever heard in high school. It was January 25th, 1968, in Mr. Goodwin's physics, the afternoon physics class, and he said, "You can put anything anywhere with a big enough hammer." Paula McDonald died about 2 years ago, I think. Katie Mary's up in Minnesota. Kathy McLeod, I guess, is nearby. See posts. Tom McMurray is a long-term school board member and ambulance guy. Okay, Paul and I have been friends for a long time. I suspect it may have ended today when I show this. It's just a wonderful photo, and I just cropped. It was some scouting, I think, activity, and I saw that picture. Wow, I can't wait to show that one. Paul Neal, I understand from Paul, is a very successful businessman in sheet metal. Nancy Opinka is not here, but her husband is. I generally crop people, but except I couldn't do it for Sandy because she's reading a book in this photo and she's still prolifically reading.
Yes.
Janice Potts died, many years ago now. Marion Schmidt is alive and well, somewhere in the township, off the digital grid. Judy Sakio's in the audience. In fact, I posted a photo of Judy and various classmates doing the hokey pokey on the Facebook group, but she's not doing the hokey pokey in this photo, though it was taken the same day. Tom Stuck is in South Carolina. Rich Wagner died about 2 years ago. I'm in touch with Dick Withers. He's been out in Washington State for a long time. And I met Jim each of the last 2 years briefly. And then I also found lots of photos of parents, and I stopped once I filled one collage here. So is Mrs. Caprini in the audience? Well, I'm so glad you're here. Oh, I'm sorry. So, Mrs. D. Pierre is here. Glad you came, and then Debbie Caprini said she couldn't make it from Kentucky, although she thought she might, but that one of her brothers was going to bring her today, so I was hoping she could be here. Aldo Icardi. Yes. Amazing history. He wrote a book called American Master Spy. About he did amazing things undercover in Italy during the war, and then was falsely accused of murdering his superior officer. It was a giant scandal, big trial in the 50s. And I have no reason to believe that he ever did the crime that was committed, but he went through hell as a result of the false accusation. And then, you know, it's very easy to find photos of our high school teachers because we have all those yearbooks and we're older, but finding photos of grade school teachers is much harder. So I got 2 slides with grade school teachers, and this one is kind of special for me because my mom is in the photo. And yeah, that's Mrs. Barr, who I had for 5th grade, and then various other teachers. And then one more set, I had Mrs. Hughes for 4th grade. What I unfortunately cannot do is the 2 that I had this incredibly strong perfume. And due to limits of technology, you know, you can only see their pictures. Experience the perfume. And this is Judy Sakia's in the audience. That's her mom there. Last slide. And one of the things that is really special to me is seeing the photos of when classes get together long after they graduate. And so this was in 1962. It was a class of 1912. I mean, the school, they were, I believe, the 10th class to ever graduate from the high school, and most of the ones in the class came back for the commencement ceremony. And so there's all sorts of things in addition in these newspapers that I didn't cover. So they will be going to the library, and unless there are copyright or legal issues, they will be scanned in searchable formats so that, you know, within, I don't know how long it's going to take, but, you know, anybody will be able to go to the website and find these newspapers and peruse them at your leisure, and they're just full of treasure. All sorts of activities were covered. It's just amazing, almost blanket coverage of things going on in the township. So I guess that's it, and be happy to try to answer questions.
Thank you.